Today I'm going to go through some things that you might be able to do if you find yourself in a situation with a broken bolt. So if you're here, then you've either found yourself in a bad predicament or you're watching this for entertainment. Either way, I want to show a few tricks that I know. Now, there is already quite a few videos like this on YouTube. But in those videos, I feel like that each one just covers a few different things. So what I'm going to do is just walk you through the way that I would attack the broken bolt and the first things I would look at and the progression I would go through before I would choose how to get that bolt out. So I'll start off with some of the easier things and then I'll work my way up to the final thing that you may have to end up doing, which the final thing would be the hardest thing, which would be the thing that I would try not to do. Now, I'm going to try to show you some of these techniques, as I said, but I can't replicate the situation you're in. I've got this out in the open. This is going to be pretty easy for me to be able to do. The bolt that you may be trying to get may not be so easy to get to, but I can't replicate all the situations. So all I can do is just try to give you some ideas and hopefully you can take it from there. But the first thing, man, is you're going to end up probably frustrated. I know I'll get frustrated. It is a bad day. You snap a bolt off, especially if you're working on somebody's vehicle or even working on your own vehicle and you need to get it back running, or working on anything. You snap a bolt, you already know you're going to be in a bad position. So the first thing that I'm going to say is, and I don't recommend this, but especially if you're working on somebody else's car. But the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask myself if this bolt is even necessary. Do I necessarily have to worry about replacing this bolt? For example, if it's something to where something could leak, or if it's a safety hazard, then of course it's gonna have to be replaced. But if you're dealing with something that's not that significant, a bracket or something like that, I would probably just, I would leave it myself personally. But like I said, I'm not recommending you do that, but that's the first thing I would ask myself. And once I've considered whether I can leave this bolt or not, we're just gonna assume that I can't leave the bolt. So we're gonna go from there. I'm gonna bring you over here and I'm gonna walk you through my progression. I've intentionally broke some of these bolts. I've tried to mimic them being broken as best I could and tried to make the surfaces as uneven as possible because that's probably gonna be what you're dealing with. Now, first starting off, it's probably going to be rusty. That's probably going to be one of the reasons why the bolt broke. And if that's the case, then I would probably start with some sort of penetrating fluid, spray it down in there, let it set for a few, and you can also try to put some heat on it. Now, when you're using your heat, you want to use some MAP gas, some acetylene gas to try to heat it up. Now, you can heat the bolt up a little bit and it could burn off some of the rust, but you really need to try to heat up around the outside or the edges of where the bolt is, not directly on the bolt, because heat is going to cause that metal to expand. So when you heat the bolt up, it's going to expand into the threads. And as I said, it may cause it to burn the rust, and when it recontracts, it may loosen it up. But I would probably heat the outside of it. That's going to be your best bet. Heat the outside of it. Try to make the threads expand away from the bolt. Now, starting off, this is going to be super obvious for a lot of people. And as I said, you're going to be dealing with a lot of things that I'm not dealing with here. This is going to look a lot easier than it's really going to be. It's going to be harder. You're going to have to deal with all the elements and everything else. So I'm just trying to make this as simple as possible. But the first thing I look for is if there is any surface protruding above the other surface that I can get a hold of. If that's the case, then you can break out some vice grips. There's different types of vice grips, and you can try to get on it and get a hold of it, lock it down real tight, try to get it started out. Or you could try to use some Knipex Cobra pliers, which is really what I recommend for anything, man. These are probably the best pliers that you can get, and they're not that expensive. If you don't own these, man, I really recommend getting, like I have 3 separate pairs, and you can get them, all 3 for under $100. So on Amazon, I'm going to link them down below. If you're interested to check out anything I talk about in this video, it will be linked below. But there are other Cobra plier lookalikes like these channel locks, which work okay, but they're made in the USA. So, you know, if you like made in the USA tools, obviously you may want to gravitate towards these, but in my opinion, man, these things do not hold anywhere near as good as these. You can't adjust them as much as these. These have a lot of adjustments for different sizes. These are more like your general slip pliers. They just have a few spots. And if you're in between those two sizes, then you may find yourself, you know, wishing you had these Cobra pliers. So like I said, they're not that expensive, man. Really recommend everyone has some of these. But these pliers also have a really thin head, so you can get down on a bolt a lot easier, something like this, and you can get a hold of it if it's sticking up enough for you to get a hold of, and hopefully maybe you can twist it out. Now, that situation is obviously the most ideal situation, and if you're lucky enough, then congratulations, man. But most of the time, it's going to be a little bit more difficult than that. So we'll move on to the next step. Now, say if this thing's so rusty and say I can get a hold of the head a little bit, but it's kind of crumbling, breaking as I'm getting a hold of it, I would probably move on to the next thing, to where I would try either an air hammer or a cold chisel and try to just tap this with a hammer. You can get a hold of a corner of it, try to get it on there and tap with the hammer. And a lot of times you can work this thing loose. Now, your air hammer is going to be more ideal in that situation, especially with rust, because the pneumatic action is going to break that bolt loose. But if it's crumbling, then that may also just cause it to crumble more. But this is a great air hammer. It's on Amazon. It's about $100. It'll be linked below too. As I said, anything I talk about here will be linked below. But I could just hook a chisel up to this, put it on here, and try to wiggle it out, and we'll get a look at it. So you're obviously going to want this to turn in the direction that it loosens. So you want to aim your chisel and your air hammer in that direction to try to make it turn. And as you see, it's turning it there. So that will work in a lot of cases and is a great option. But one thing you have to consider is the surface that you're laying this on, because this air hammer will damage that surface and may damage it pretty bad. So you definitely want to consider the surface that you're having to use this on. And if this bolt is pushed down even a thread or two, you can still get your air hammer chisel in there to try to turn it, but then you have to start worrying about damaging the threads. Now, another great option, if there's a little bit sticking up, is if you have a welder and know how to weld a little bit, you can take a bolt that's a little bit bigger or close to the same size as your bolt, and you can place it on top, and you can actually weld this nut to that bolt to create a new head for that bolt. Now, when it comes to doing this, you're going to need to know what type of metal this bolt is, because for instance, if this bolt is a stainless bolt, then you could try to weld this, but it's not going to work. So most of the time you're not going to be dealing with stainless bolts, but if you are dealing with a stainless bolt, then you're going to need a different type of wire to use. Your MIG or even a stick will work. Anything will work. We're just going to try to weld this nut to this. And another trick that you can do if you're worried about damaging the surface is you could just place a washer over top of this, and you can weld this washer to that bolt, and then you can take this nut and weld that nut to the washer, and it'll come up if you're worried about damaging this here. But most of the time I would just go straight nut to the bolt, and we'll go ahead and weld this and see what happens. Now, all I have here is just a straight MIG with some flux core wires, so you don't need anything special to be able to do this. Flux core will work just fine. Now, once you've done this, you don't really want to use an impact here to take this off. You want to either use a wrench or you want to use a ratchet and a socket. But as you see here, we can now twist this. And we was able to create a new head for this broken bolt. So that's a great option that you can use if you have a welder and if there's enough material there that you can actually weld to. So those are pretty easy techniques that you can use to get these bolts out. Now we'll get to the harder situations, the situations where the bolt is actually recessed too far down into the hole for you to be able to get a hold of, for you to be able to use an air hammer, for you to be able to weld a nut to it. And we'll see what our options are at this point. Okay, as we can see, now this is recessed down a couple threads. If you tried to get a chisel in there, you may be able to get it in there, but then you're starting to run the risk of damaging these threads. So you need to be really careful with that. If you damage your threads, it's not the end of the world, but try not to damage them. If you do damage them, then there are some things you can do to fix them. You could try to retap them. You could try to drill it out, put a heliocoil in, but it's best to try not to damage these threads. So what I'm gonna do now is, if I was in this situation, I would start off, I would heat it up, I would spray some penetrating fluid in there, like I said before. Now what I'm gonna attempt to do is I'm gonna attempt to use a punch, and I'm gonna do this for two reasons. I'm gonna try to shock this bolt to break loose any rust or anything. And I'm also gonna try to start myself a spot as close to the center as I possibly can be, so that when I start this next step, it'll be able to work a lot better. So let's go ahead and try to center this up. Now, the problem that you're gonna run into, which is the problem I'm running into now because I tried to mimic this having an uneven surface, is that it's gonna be hard to center this because of that uneven surface. So you're just gonna have to try to get it as close as you possibly can. Now that's not directly in the center, but it is pretty close. So next, what you're gonna need, I would buy this set. This set is on Amazon. I'll link it below. It is a set of left-handed drill bits and extractors. What is a left-handed drill bit? A left-handed drill bit is you drill in the off direction and it goes forward. So it's exactly opposite from your standard drill bit. Now in this set, this gives you some numbers. This lets you know which extractor and which drill bit you should use for what size bolt. Now I know this bolt is a 3/8 bolt. If you don't know, then you can try to measure it, you could try to guess, but in my opinion, man, start off smaller and work your way up. Try to get it as close to about 2/3 the size of the bolt as you can. But start off, you can always drill more. You can't ever add material back. So we're gonna start off, we're gonna try to use the left-handed drill bit to drill our hole to use this extractor. And we're gonna hope that maybe using this left-handed drill bit, because I'm drilling in the off position, that maybe it'll have enough drag on it to be able to pull this bolt to the surface. So now you really wanna use some sort of oil here. You can use oil, you can use air oil, you could use transmission fluid, you could use tapping fluid, you could use anything, but you really want to use some type of oil here. These bolts are hard, so using these drill bits, you also want to have a good set of drill bits or some new drill bits. If you don't have the left-handed drill bits, then we're going to move on to the next step on that. But if you don't own this set, man, really think about getting this set. Now we can see it actually pulled this bolt up. This bolt doesn't have anything really holding it because there's no rust or anything like that. So the left-handed motion was able to pull this bolt to the surface. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drill a hole and I'm gonna show you what would happen if it wasn't able to come up. Now, when you're drilling this out, you definitely want to make sure that you're going as level as possible with the direction the bolt's going. This bolt is going straight down, so I'm trying to go as straight down as I possibly can. If it was going this way, I would try to angle it this way, try to follow the direction of the bolt. But I've got this drilled down about a quarter of the way through this bolt, so I'm going to try to use one of these extractors now. And if this wouldn't work, then I would just keep drilling further and further into the bolt. Now, this is another area where these Lisle tap drivers come in really handy. So if you don't own these are another thing you should get as well. I'll link them down below. These work good for chasing threads with taps or using them in this situation. Now, these are reverse thread. So what that means is to tighten these, when you're loosening your bolt, it's actually going to be driving this further down into it, which in turn is going to try to remove the bolt. So let's give it a shot. So as we've seen, this did bite into it. It did remove this. If you was in a situation where you was doing this and it was rusty, the bolt was bad, another thing you could try to do to start these off is put them in the hole you've drilled and give them a few taps down in there to try to make them fit a little tighter to allow the teeth to bite a hold to remove the bolt. As I said, I'm doing this under ideal conditions, so it's a lot easier than it actually is, but you get the idea, the gist of it. Now, as I said, when I went further in there, if I wasn't able to make this work with as much as I drilled, which as we see, I drilled out about a quarter of this bolt, then I would have just simply kept drilling until I could get as much of this extractor into that bolt as possible. And if I would have got to the point to where I've drilled through the bolt, nothing's working. Now comes the part where having this as centered as possible is really going to help you. But as I said, it just has to be close. It doesn't have to be perfect. So now you're to the point, you've tried the extractors, nothing's working. Now you're down to your last option. Your last option is going to be to drill this hole to the size that the bolt is that you're putting in there. How do you know what size that bolt is? If you have a piece of it, you can try to measure it to find the thread pitch. You can try to measure it to see how thick it is. And then you can look up a tap drill chart to find out. For instance, this is a 3/8 bolt. So to drill this out, now to tap this is going to need to be about a 5/16 drill bit or an 8mm drill bit. Now, when you're to this point, man, this is what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to find a drill bit that just removes a little bit of material every time. So you're going to keep wanting to step up, step up, step up. So we looked at that. We know. Now, it's also going to depend on the thread pitch of the bolt that you're putting in. But with that being said, man, just because you're removing a certain size bolt doesn't mean you have to put that same size bolt back in. So for instance, if this was a 3/8 20 with a 20 thread, now you're gonna have to put a new bolt back in anyway. So if you got some 3/8 18, 3/8 16 on hand, then you just drill it out for that. Or obviously if it's smaller, it's not gonna work. So you would wanna go up a little bit. I'm just using that as an example. You could go up one more size and you could you could drill it, tap it, put a new bolt in there, and it's gonna work. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the same bolt. But what you're gonna wanna do is while this is down in there, you're gonna wanna keep stepping your drill bits up little by little, little by little. You'll get to the point to where you're at the right drill bit size to where it'll clean those threads completely off, but will not change the diameter of the hole. So when you go to run your 3/8 tap back in here, it'll tap, you'll be fine, you'll be on your way. Now, also depending on what you're doing at this point, you're gonna have to watch out for metal shavings going down into whatever you're tapping. So that is a concern, and it's something you're gonna have to watch out for and something you're gonna have to be wary of. But I think that's gonna be it, man. I've covered almost everything I know, all the things I would have put myself through to remove this bolt. There's a million ways to do this. There's probably some stuff that I don't know. So if you know something that I don't know, if you have a trick that I didn't go over here, leave it down in the comments below. Help somebody out, because that's the whole point of this video. I just wanted to make a comprehensive video about removing a broken bolt, as comprehensive as I can, and give you everything that I know that I'm thinking of. If I'm forgetting something, then I think I've gave you enough to be able to get out almost any broken bolt you're going to be dealing with. So I appreciate you watching. If you found this video helpful, subscribe below, because I'll be doing more videos like this. Projects, tips, tricks, tool reviews, everything. So appreciate you watching. Until next time, stay real.